right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely afternoon. My colleagues and I, Ana Espada and Rohini Singh, I'm Milesa Gomez, are here with you today to talk to you about what must schools do about bullying. While we wait, we kind of wanted to get a feel of who is here today. So we're just going to run a poll to see who's joining us today, whether parents, professionals, students. If you guys want to take a minute to click on the poll and let us know who's in the room today.
Great, it looks like we have mostly professionals today, some parents.
We also would like to know where you guys are joining us from. So, great.
Here, let me launch the other poll for that. There we go. Great, looks like we have a real mix. Some Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx.
That's great. All right. Thank you for joining us today. I love the mix. We usually have mostly Brooklyn, nothing against Brooklyn, but yeah, I'm excited about the mix. Thank you so much. So we will get started. You can start with the next slide, please. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is Advocates for Children. Advocates for Children is an independent agency that protects the educational rights of all New York City students. It was founded in 1971 by parents of students with disability, and our mission has expanded over the years. Some of our projects include early childhood, charter schools, teaches, immigrant students, school justice, and older students, to name a few. Our services include our helpline, which is toll-free. The number is on the screen, and it's open from Monday through Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We provide free guides and resources, and they're great. They're plain language. We also provide free workshops and trainings and free legal services to low-income families. So I'm going to go over an overview of what we will be covering for today's training, our agenda. We will allow time for questions. You can also feel free throughout the webinar, and we will also be pausing to use our Q&A feature throughout this webinar. We will also be sending a copy of the slides that we will be presenting on today, and it will have all the information that you can read about it later on. So we're going to be going over what is bullying, how are students protected from bullying, how is bullying reported, how is bullying investigated, how is bullying determined, how should schools respond to bullying, transfers, what are the rights of students with disabilities, and resources for you all. So we have a little pre-test. We want to get an idea of how much you know about bullying. And so if you guys can take a minute to go ahead and fill out our pre-test. There's no right or wrong answers here. We just kind of want to know, like, what do you know, so that we can help you understand.
I just launched the poll. See what folks think. All right, let's see if maybe a few more people want to answer the poll before I close it.
Remember, there's no right or wrong answers.
All right. Okay. Great. So we have a mix of answers. And I can, we're not gonna give you the answers right now. What we'll do is we'll go through the presentation and then at the end, I will tell you what the answers are. But a lot of the information in the presentation will answer hopefully many of these questions. So we can just jump in now. Hi, my name is Rohini Singh. I'm an attorney at Advocates for Children. I work in the School Justice Project there, where I specialize in working with students that have been involved in school discipline and school suspensions, students with behavioral challenges. And then I also work with students that have either been engaging in bullying behavior or have been the targets of bullying behavior. Everybody who's participating in this webinar has likely at some point witnessed bullying. You might have experienced it too. Maybe you've been the target of bullying, or maybe you've engaged in bullying behavior or intimidated another person without really knowing that you were doing that. The point is, we all have personal experiences with bullying, and we all have different definitions that we use for the word bullying. So what I'm going to talk about today is what the legal definition of bullying is in New York City public schools, and specifically what New York City public schools need to do to protect students. Just to note, I know Melissa mentioned the Q&A feature. If folks are not able to find it, it should be at the bottom of your screen. There's a little button that says Q&A. Feel free at any point to just type a question into the Q&A, and someone will be monitoring that throughout the presentation to either answer you directly, or we'll stop and answer your questions during the presentation. I also want to note today I'm not going to be talking about or covering charter schools. AFC does have a guide if you have a question about the specific rules for charter schools, and we'll include a link to that at the end when we include some resources. But this presentation is really going to cover students that are going to schools within the New York City Department of Education. So this definition here on this slide comes from the New York City Chancellor's Regulations, specifically Chancellor's Regulation A832. It also comes from state law and the Dignity for All Students Act. As you can see, bullying can take a lot of forms. It can be spoken, it can be physical, it can be electronic. And in order for behavior to be bullying, it must impact a student's well-being at school. So specifically, it must create a hostile environment, which is defined as something that substantially interferes with student learning, substantially interferes with a student's mental, emotional, and physical well-being, reasonably causes fear for safety, and is reasonably expected to cause physical injury or emotional harm. So for any of these different behaviors, if it's bullying, you are not allowed to do it in the New York City Department of Education. It's also important to note that behavior can be bullying as long as it's reasonably expected to cause injury or emotional harm, or causes fear for safety. So even if a student says, someone threatened me, but I'm not scared, or that the harm didn't actually occur, it could still be considered bullying if it creates this hostile environment, and if it's reasonably expected to cause fear for safety, or reasonably expected to cause a physical injury. Great. So what kinds of behaviors may be forms of bullying? Bullying can take many forms, and the laws and regulations list these types of behavior on the slide here as bullying. And so that can be physical violence, stalking, threats, taunts and teasing, aggressive or menacing gestures, derogatory language, name calling or slurs, or exclusion from peer groups designed to humiliate or isolate. I want to make sure that right off the bat that I highlight that when you're talking about bullying with a family or a school, it's really important to frame bullying as behavior, because oftentimes students play really fluid roles when it comes to bullying. So where in one incident, they might be the aggressors towards one student, they might be considered the person engaging in the bullying behavior. In another incident, they might actually be the target. They might actually be subjected to bullying behavior. And so we really try to avoid and ideally shouldn't talk about someone as the bully or the bullied, because what's happening is that they're acting out a specific type of behavior. And from our perspective, it's really important to talk about it as behavior, because students can change or learn different behavior, but it's really hard to change your identity. And so, this is all about supporting students, both students that are engaging in bullying behavior and those as well as students that are the target of bullying behavior. And so, we want to make sure we talk about it as behavior and not as part of their identity or who they are. It's also really important to distinguish between bullying and just conflict between people, because not all issues between two people can be considered bullying or rise to this level of bullying. So some of the hallmarks of bullying are intimidation, repeated behaviors happening over and over again, shaming for one aspect of someone's identity, excluding a student based on an aspect of their identity. So it's important to note this because not all of the behavior that's on this slide is always going to be bullying. And there are also behaviors that might count as bullying that are not on this slide. What you need to do is really go back to the definition of bullying and determine if the behavior has these elements that create this hostile environment for a student before using the word bullying to describe it. Great, so as I think all of you predicted on the pretest, cyberbullying is a form of bullying behavior. So anything that meets the definition in the previous slide, or my first slide about the definition of bullying, if it's happening online, it can be considered bullying. But you should also note that in order for a student to be disciplined for cyberbullying, there has to be a connection between the cyberbullying and the school. So it must happen between members of the same school community, or maybe reference something that might happen in schools. So it has to be connected to the school in some way, or the school community in some way. This is really especially relevant right now, and a lot of young people might not recognize that hurtful online behavior can be considered cyberbullying, especially in new settings like virtual classrooms. And we'll talk a little later about responses that schools can potentially have when there is cyberbullying happening in the online remote school environment. But it's just important to note now, that young people are still adjusting to learning and interacting with their peers sort of 24/7 virtually. And many young people are also feeling really new and uncertain emotions during the pandemic, like anxiety, anger, fear, isolation, or stress. And these things really have the potential to cause an increase in cyberbullying behavior. Again, it's just really important to explain what's appropriate online behavior and what's not appropriate. And like I said, I'll get into some of our recommended responses to cyberbullying later on. And so, as I sort of alluded to before, the most difficult question when it comes to bullying is how do you recognize what is bullying and what isn't bullying? So sometimes you might observe an interaction between two young people, and you might, something might seem off to you, but you aren't sure. Or you might sense a change in a young person's behavior and think that bullying is happening, but again, you aren't really quite sure. And what we do know is that there are certain characteristics of bullying and situations where bullying is more likely to occur. As we discussed before, bullying really is about intimidation. And so some characteristics of bullying include a power difference. So people from communities that experience discrimination outside of school often also experience discrimination inside of school. You can also look for actual or intention to cause harm, which again can be a form of intimidation. And then also looking for repeated incidents or behavior. So these are all things that if they exist, it indicates that the behavior might be considered bullying behavior. And bullying is also most likely to occur, as I mentioned, towards commonly targeted groups. So bullying based on weight, gender, perceived sexual orientation, disability, race, ethnicity, national origin, religion. These are all commonly targeted groups or identities. And so bullying is most likely to occur when sort of those characteristics exist. It is also more likely to occur where there is a low adult presence and where young people are socializing. So lunch, recess, gym, the transition between classes, and of course, online. And so the laws and regulations that govern New York City public schools say that students can't be bullied for any reason, but in particular, they can't be bullied for an aspect of their identity. And so the laws and regulations, they lay out the specific characteristics or groups where bullying is not permitted. And so the slide contains all of those groups: race, color, creed, ethnicity, national origin, citizenship or immigration status, religion, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, and weight. And the intent of the law is to protect young people from bullying based on their identity. And so this actually includes some identities that are protected from bullying under the law, but are not protected in other settings. And it's also important to note that the membership in the group can be actual or perceived. And so that means that even if they aren't actually part of this specific protected group, if the person that's engaging in the bullying behavior believes them to be, then it could still be considered bias-based bullying. Great. So I think we're going to pause here for some questions.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to go ahead and type them into the Q&A. Right now, I don't see anything, Rohini. There might be something in the chat. Give me 1 second. Evelyn mentioned that bullying can also bully for being ugly.
Right, so physical appearance might be a characteristic that someone is experiencing bullying. It looks like there are 2 people that have raised their hands. I don't know if you have a specific question, if you could put it in the Q&A, that would be helpful. Okay, well, maybe I can continue and then as things come up, I can answer them.
Yeah.
Great. So I just wanted to make sure here that I cite and discuss the specific laws that we're referencing here. So there are a number of laws that protect students in the New York City Department of Education from bullying. The state law is called the Dignity for All Students Act. There's also the New York State Human Rights Law. In New York City Department of Education schools, we're, again, like I mentioned, going to be looking at this Chancellor's Regulation, A832, which is available on the DOE's website, and we'll also link to it at the end. And just to summarize, the law basically says that all students have a right to safe learning environments. They can't be discriminated against for any aspect of their identity, and schools must report bullying incidents to the state education department every year. So in addition, the law says that that schools have to do a number of things each year in order to address bullying behavior. So first, they have to create a plan to prevent, address harassment, intimidation, and bullying. You can actually ask your school or a school that you're working with if you could see this plan, because they are required to create it. They have to publicize anti-bullying rules. The requirements in the regulations are specifically they have to distribute a brochure, and they have to make that Chancellor's Regulation that I mentioned, A832, available upon request. And so if you're trying to figure out, your students' rights, it's important to sort of talk to the school and ask specifically for them to make these resources available to you. They also are required to train a staff member to be what's called the Respect for All Liaison. And we'll discuss what the Respect for All Liaison is and does in a moment. But they're required to train that person and then also to train all students and staff on bullying policies by October 31st every year. And so if your child has not, or a student you're working with has not received that training, or school staff have not received that training, it's important to ask the school that they do that and make that available. And some aspects of the staff training, they have to include raising awareness and sensitivity to potential acts of discrimination, harassment, and bullying directed at students, the identification and mitigation of harassment, bullying, and discrimination, social patterns of harassment, bullying, and discrimination, preventing and responding to incidents, understanding the effects of bullying and strategies for effectively addressing bullying in educational settings, and then just generally how to promote a safe and supportive school environment, including how to incorporate these concepts into classroom activities. And then finally, schools are responsible for acting. So they have to report accusations of bullying or incidents of bullying. They have to investigate them. And finally, if they determine that bullying does exist, or if they become aware of bullying behavior, they're required to stop it from occurring. So the RFA liaison is sort of a key person in terms of implementing all of these requirements. So they can be any school staff member, and they're meant to be sort of the in-house expert on bullying. RFA liaisons, or Respect for All liaisons, they're supposed to be resources, they're supposed to be a resource at every school, since bullying can be challenging for adults in schools to identify and address. So, if another school staff member thinks bullying might be occurring, but they're not sure, the RFA liaison is the person they should be speaking with to determine if it is bullying and what should be done to prevent it. So that person should have all of the knowledge about how to investigate, how to determine what's bullying, and they should be trained to do that. And their role really is to prevent bullying, harassment, and discrimination in schools. And so, they should be sort of doing all of that training and all of that work to try to prevent or create an environment where bullying doesn't exist. And you can find the contact information for your child's school RFA liaison on the school website. And so you'll see that here. It should be listed under general information. If you go to the overview tab for the school website, general information, you'll see, they have the principal, parent coordinator, and then the Respect for All liaison is listed separately. So that person should be there. And we put a link to the specific policies for the Respect for All liaison in the presentation. So you can click on that once we send you a copy.
All right, so now we're going to take another pause to check our Q&A. We do have one question, Rohini. My SWD child reported systematic bullying behavior by one specific child that occurred over the course of one school year. Once reported to the school, they conducted a full investigation, and we were told that it was unsubstantiated because there were no witness accounts. There were no witness accounts because the bullying behavior was done without any adults present. Currently, the school is keeping the boys separated, and if anything else occurs, we're supposed to flag it. How do we handle I can't say the word, unsubstantiated evidence? There we go. Thank you.
So this is, I know every situation is very individualized. And so and this is something that I'm sure happens often, that parents will report bullying, and then they will, a school will do an investigation and that the reports are unsubstantiated. There are things you can do if you disagree with that, and we'll get to that a little later, sort of what your rights are if you disagree with the outcome of an investigation. But it's still possible, even if you disagree and you sort of take the steps to sort of take it to the next level, that they're still unsubstantiated. What we would certainly recommend you do is just keep in communication with the school, try to use, if you can, try to create some sort of plan with the school to try to just make sure that the situation is continuing to be monitored and that further incidents don't occur. But we will talk a little bit later in the presentation about what you can do if you disagree with the school's determination about bullying. So.
Thank you. That's all we have for now. So we can go ahead and go to the next one. Thank you. So now we're going to touch base on how to report bullying. First, if a school staff member observes something that they think may be bullying, they must report it. School staff has to report the bullying, orally report to the principal or the RFA liaison within 1 day, and file a written report within 2 days. Any person can report bullying to the school. There are several contacts that you can reach out to. Respect for All has a designated email in any language, which is important to know. You can also submit a complaint online. And if you don't have access to email, you can call the telephone number on the screen. Again, we will, as Rohini mentioned, we will be sending this presentation, so you will have access to all this information. Second, I wanted to mention that email may be best for people that are intimidated or uncomfortable about reporting bullying directly to a staff member. I wanted to note that the RFA Liaison's email address is connected to the Office of Safety and Youth Development. The Chancellor's regulation has a model form for alleged bullying or harassment incidents. Several school districts also have models that have a model DASA complaint forms. You can go ahead. So how to report bullying. What do you do if the school bully is a school staff, is part of the school staff? So actions by the school staff towards students and families can also be considered bullying, harassment, or discrimination. To report bullying, harassment, or discrimination by school staff, contact the school principal, email Respect for All. Again, if you do not have an email, you can submit a written report as well. Make sure that you keep a copy for yourself. You can call the Office of Special Investigations, also known as OSI, at the number provided. You can also go online and file an OSI report. They have a complaint form. Discrimination against parents based on race, color, ethnicity, national origin, immigration status, or religion. You can contact the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity Management's complaint unit. So here are a few tips for reporting bullying. You have to make sure that you report in writing with proof of the date set. Using an email is often the best form to do so. It automatically includes a timestamp, or you can submit an online form. It's important to include details of what happened, who was involved, when, where did it happen, what class, in what school, out of school, and how did it harm the student. If you do not have an email, write it out, submit it to the school administration, and ask for a copy with a date stamp. Every school office staff has a stamp available that you can ask them to stamp the paper that you submitted. To the Chancellor's regulation, A-A32, also protects people who report bullying from retaliation.
Once a complaint is made, it must be entered onto the online occurrence report system or the OORS or ORS within 24 hours of receiving an oral report. The principal must investigate the complaint within 5 school days of the oral report. How is bullying investigated? First, a complaining witness is interviewed. Secondly, a written statement describing the behavior, location, time, and possible eyewitness or witnesses is or are requested, and the conversation is documented. Then the person being accused is interviewed. The accused is advised to stop the behavior if it occurred, and the conversation is documented. Eyewitnesses are interviewed, and the conversation are documented. And written statements are requested from the accused, the accuser, and any eyewitness or witnesses. How is bullying investigated? At the beginning of the investigation, the principal or Respect for All liaison, the RFA liaison, must contact the parents of all students involved to discuss the allegations. And there's an exception to the rule. Schools cannot contact parents if there are safety concerns. And at the end of the investigation, the principal or Respect for All liaison must report the results of the investigation to the parents of all students involved in the incident. How is bullying determined? The determination must consider the totality of the circumstances, including the ages of the persons involved in the incident, the nature and severity of the incident, the frequency and duration of the incident, the number of persons involved in the incident, the context of the incident or incidents, where the incident or incidents occurred.
Great. Okay. All right. I think we're just going to pause for a second and see if there's see if there's any questions.
So I don't see any questions right now, Rohini.
Okay.
I think we can keep going.
Great. Okay, so here we get to the question of how should schools respond to bullying? And so, you know, if a school has determined that something has happened and it is bullying, there are a number of things it needs to do or it could potentially do. But it's really important to note that not all complaints will be determined to be bullying. I know as we saw from the Q&A, you know, not all bullying will be found to be substantiated. But if it is found to be substantiated, first and foremost, the school has a responsibility to stop the bullying behavior. In addition, they also need to make sure that anyone that was involved isn't being harmed anymore. So the school also needs to make sure that the person who reported the bullying isn't being retaliated against. They also have to recommend supports and interventions for anyone involved. And it's important to note that students involved refers both to the student who's the target of the bullying behavior, as well as students that are engaged in bullying behavior. And schools can be really creative about how they respond to bullying. So some examples are individual counseling, positive behavior and behavior supports, education services, teaching social skills, teaching students how to cope with emotions, and collaborative problem solving. So teaching behaviors and teaching methods to really help resolve conflict between students. And if students want to try to work things out and their parents consent to this, the school may recommend restorative practices, conflict resolution, or mediation. And then finally, the school could also use progressive discipline if the behavior violated the discipline code. And so, you know, if the school determines that there was a bullying incident and is trying to figure out how to respond, they have to look at the discipline code first. And what the discipline code says is that schools must use what's called progressive discipline, which is really just a fancy way of saying that the incident should be used as a teaching moment. So schools should be keeping students in the classroom as much as possible and trying things like some of the supports and interventions I mentioned earlier before resorting to drastic measures like suspension and other forms of exclusionary discipline. Again, this is an opportunity to teach students about how their behavior impacts others and try to heal relationships and address harm between students in ways where everyone can move forward. So if the principal does determine that discipline is required, they can use some non-exclusionary forms of discipline, such as sort of doing outreach to the parent, some short-term behavioral progress reports, you know, more counseling, individual behavior contracts, things like that. And, you know, and sort of referrals for different types of training or coaching to try to prevent bullying from occurring. So what happens when the school does not respond or they determine that, you know, something isn't bullying and the bullying continues? So what we suggest is that you file a complaint with the Central Department of Education. And so if initially what you did is you spoke to the principal and filed a complaint with the school and they did the investigation, and you know, you're not satisfied with that investigation or the behavior is still happening, and then it's important to then email that respectforall@schools.nyc.gov email address, or there's also a form on the DOE's website that you can fill out. You can also call 311 or 718-935-2288, which is, you know, again, a way to report bullying to the central DOE. You can also contact the superintendent's office or the Borough field office. And, you know, we'll have we'll have specific links to some of these contacts later on in the presentation. But these are all people, that are sort of outside of the school that can maybe take another look and determine if maybe that behavior was actually bullying, and help you and help the school and support the school in trying to address it. Again, all the rules still that we mentioned before when it comes to reporting the bullying incident initially still apply. So put it in writing, send yourself an email or a text message or someone else to remind yourself like when you did it, when you sent it in. There's that form that's attached to the chancellor's regulations in case that's helpful, things like that. Another option that you have is you can file a complaint with the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. And so this is the US Department of Education. It's the federal agency. And we will include a link at the end on how to contact the Office of Civil Rights within the US Department of Education. But just so that you note, that the timeline for filing a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, it often takes a very long time. So you have to make that report within 180 days of the incident, but it sometimes can take years for that complaint to be resolved. Finally, another thing you can do if the school isn't responding or the bullying keeps continuing is you can call us. You can call Advocates for Children, and we can try to assist you in brainstorming some next steps and how to talk to the school and what your rights are and what you can do in that situation. And so how can parents work with the school? So, there are some options. How can parents work with the school? So the first thing that they can do to work with a school is ask for what's called a safety plan or an individual support plan or ISP. And this is a written document with a specific plan outlined to address the bullying that students are experiencing or potentially that they're engaging in. And so some ideas for that plan is you could change the student schedule to keep students separate at times during the day when the bullying behavior is most likely to occur. You can request additional services like counseling. You can make sure that all staff have notice of the bullying history so that they're on the lookout and they can make sure that they're watching and are aware of what's been going on and can report any incidents that they might see. You can request restorative practices if all parties agree to it. And I'll go in a little bit about what restorative practices is in the next slide. You can suggest staff or student trainings. You can ask the school to designate a safe adult for a student to check in with during the day, or ask school staff, like a particular school staff member, to keep a lookout for further bullying incidents. It's also really important to include the young person in this process. I mean, they know they're the best reporters of their own experiences and know what they need in order to feel safe. And so it's really important in creating the plan that the young person is involved in it. Here are some responses, specific responses to cyberbullying. So, as I mentioned before, especially in this world where so many young people's interactions with peers in school are now occurring online, it's really important that they're taught, what is appropriate and what is inappropriate behavior. And so there's this concept that exists called digital citizenship. And what it is just, it's curriculum that specifically talks about what is responsible online behavior. And so something you could do is request that the school teach all students or teach the students involved in the incident about this concept of digital citizenship so that they know and understand the importance of responsible online behavior. Another thing you can request is, and it's really important that teachers and school staff members have the knowledge of technology and can take just some basic steps to protect students from cyberbullying. For example, they can monitor chats, like make sure they're monitoring like online message boards, things like that, and can address any issues immediately as they occur. So sometimes there's a knowledge gap between school staff members and students when it comes to technology. And so it's important, if you're concerned, to talk to your school about how to fill that gap and make sure that teachers are able to navigate these spaces and keep students safe on the online environment. You can also ask for the school to provide students with social emotional supports, which can be done remotely, or request restorative justice practices to help address conflict. And, restorative justice practices, the concept is really just to build and heal relationships and hold students accountable and teach positive behaviors. And so this can be like conflict resolution. You can have like what's called a restorative circle, where the students come together and talk about how they were harmed and how it impacted them. There's the school tries to identify a path forward where everyone feels safe and protected. And it's been proven and found that, this really improves student behavior and academic outcomes. It lowers the repeated behavior incidents and contributes to a more positive school environment generally. It's also important if you feel like the school is not addressing behavior in the way that they should, or addressing bullying in the way that they should, that you sort of recruit people within the DOE to help the school support you and support the student. And so here we have a link to all of the borough office contacts by school. And so if it seems like a school is unable to support a student in a bullying situation, we really encourage you to push the school to involve some of these other players. So the director of student services, the counseling manager, the school climate manager, the crisis intervention or de-escalation manager, the behavior specialist, restorative justice manager. All these people have they have a wealth of knowledge on how to work with students through bullying incidents. So we really encourage you to reach out to them.
Okay.
Any questions?
It looks
Right
like no
now,
questions.
I'm looking into the Q&A, and right now we do not have any questions. We're taking a quick pause. So if you have a question on anything that we've covered, please type it in the Q&A. We are happy and here to answer your questions. All right, I am not seeing anything, so we can go ahead and move on, Anna.
Okay. There are other options, and one of them is that you can request a school transfer. However, a school transfer is difficult to get, and you can transfer if there are safety concerns. The details, so if you want a safety transfer, you need to detail what occurred and why it's important. You can get as many school documents as possible to support a safety transfer, like for example, police reports, medical records, etc. Another way to get a transfer is to seek a guidance transfer. And you can get those if your child isn't progressing academically or socially. If the transfer would help if you make a request for a transfer, and your child cannot use and the school can't use the incident against you or to force your child out of his or her school. But superintendents must approve the transfer for an attendance or academic reasons. And then there's still other transfers. You should see Transfers Regulation A101 for other categories like medical transfers, travel transfers, sibling transfers, etc. For example, if your child has a medical condition that requires him or her to be transferred to a school closer to an emergency clinic or hospital for medical reasons, etc., or the school is too far from your home or requires specific transportation and therefore may be a travel hardship, or you would like your child to be in a school where another one of your children is attending, and that's called a sibling transfer.
So now we're going to talk about students with disabilities and considerations. Bullying can also impact the child's academic, social, emotional, and/or behavioral functioning. If the student is engaging in or experiencing bullying, it's important to request an IEP meeting to address bullying behavior. Also, discuss this concern at the IEP meeting as well. The IEP should include a plan to prevent and address bullying and account for behavior of other students. So the more we can document these concerns, the better we can try to use the IEPs to help support both students who are experiencing bullying and engaging in bullying. So it's also important to note that for a student who is the target of bullying behavior, that you can consider requesting a functional behavioral assessment to develop a behavioral intervention plan. And it should document, the functional behavior assessment should document that he or she is the target of bullying behavior, and the BIP should specify ways that the school will keep him or her safe from this behavior. The FBA is an opportunity for a school to evaluate a child's behavior and develop the behavior intervention plan, as I just mentioned. The behavior intervention plan for all of the professionals that work with the child to address their needs. So as many as you know, many schools struggles to create these plans. The BFFC, Rohini, can you,
Sure,
the
yeah.
borough
I mean,
field?
it's the borough. I think they're just now called borough offices. So it used to be the borough
Yeah.
field support centers,
Right.
but now they're borough offices. Yeah.
Offices, yeah, that's what I know by. So thank you.
Yeah.
They're there to help schools, and many of the boroughs core offices have behavioral experts to help them develop the BIPs and conduct good FBAs. So if your school is struggling, it's important to reach out to the borough office and get assistance in making sure that the behavior intervention plan is developed accordingly. IEP goals can account for bullying behavior. So on the IEP, for example, IEP goals can include like self-advocacy skills, self-awareness, and strength building skills, the child's frustration tolerance, emotional regulation. You can also look at a website for specific language to use. And again, we'll send this out so you have the information. But you can you can add information on the goals as well. Like for example, the child will raise her hand or his hand before walking out of their seat, and implement goals into the IEP that account for bullying behavior. There are also supplementary aids and services, as Rohini briefly mentioned earlier, that can include speech language therapy, counseling, sets, assistive technology. Sometimes bullying behavior is a way that a student that is struggling academic or emotionally tries to signal that she or he are having issues with their current placement. Well, you guys check the student out. The student is super happy because their rights have been respected. So let's remember that students with disabilities have rights, even if the alleged behavior is considered bullying. They're entitled to a manifestation determination review, also known as an MDR, to determine if the behavior is a manifestation of the student's disability. We have a guide specifically on MDRs, manifestation determination review, on our website. We've also provided the link to take you to the webpage.
Great. So now we're going to go back to the pre-test and just go over the answers, which I think many of you already knew. And so the first question was, if a school staff member makes an oral report of bullying, they don't have to follow up with a written report. And so that question, the answer is false. So as we learned today, they must file a written report within 2 days of an oral report. So the second question is, cyberbullying can include actions that happen on social media outside of school hours. The answer to that is true. Yes, it can. But in order for a student to be disciplined for cyberbullying, there must be a connection between the cyberbullying and the school. And then finally, if a school investigates an incident and decides that it was not bullying, the school can't do anything to help the student who thinks that they were the target of bullying. And that's absolutely false. So schools can always provide support for students. You can still request a safety plan, an individualized support plan. You can request these all these supports and interventions I mentioned, restorative practices. Yes, you can certainly still ask for the incidents to be addressed. Great. So here is the list of resources that we mentioned. And when we send out this presentation, you'll be able to see all of these links. Great. So now if you could just take a few moments and fill out our final survey, we would be really grateful to that. This survey is essentially how we're able to provide these trainings for free for the community. And so if you could fill out this poll, that would be very helpful. Just some wrapping up reminders. If you need help, just ask us, call our helpline. The numbers in the presentation and also on our website. We are open. We have been working remotely since last March, but have been, despite being remote, able to provide all the services that we still provide for the community. Things might change as things change within schools. You can check our website for updates related to COVID and school openings and school closures and remote learning and things like that. And yeah, in addition to calling us, you could also email us at info@advocatesforchildren.org, and you can reach someone that way and to help you. So yeah, thank you to everyone who has voted who has filled out our feedback survey.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
And we can also just, if folks have final questions, if you want to put them in the Q&A, we're happy to.
Yeah.
What it looks like.
We're sticking around for a few more minutes before we head out. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you haven't taken the survey, please take it. This helps us to continue to provide these free webinars for all of you. Thank you so much. You're welcome. We have a thank you.
Great, thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you for your thank you.
Have a great evening, everybody. We appreciate you joining us this evening. Okay, I think we have Evelyn. You're welcome to everyone who said thank you. Thanks. So Evelyn says youth can also be bullying, bullied for being quiet and shy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yes, Evelyn. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
I think this is a wrap up.
Yeah, thank you all.